Hello, folks. It's Michael with the Reason RX podcast. Hope you're doing well. We're back again. We've all been busy. Melanie's busy this weekend with family out of town, all her activities, her kids doing things. So she's unable to make it today. But we've all been busy ending up the school year, final exams and all that, grading, tutoring, teaching, finishing it off. So was that pretty busy for you, Scott?
Yes, the end of the year is always busy, making sure everything's in order. All the seniors trying to graduate, making sure they have things in order. Exams.
Yeah, and as you can tell today, folks, our guest again is Scott Harris. So, I'm still kind of recovering from stuff, so I'm a little slow. But we got your name out anyway. They know who you are. So, but yeah. And then I've been spending a while training for a fitness certification that I did at the end of May. Went up to Dallas and got a certification as a MovNat Level 2 instructor. That was cool. Nice group of people up there. There was level 1 on Saturday and Sunday. I did that last year, so I didn't need to go to that. Then level 2 was Monday and Tuesday. The MovNat master instructor Eric Brown was leading us and certifying us, and nice group of people from around the country. Let me see, 7 of us in total for this. There was a couple from the level 1 thing here were going to stay, but then they, I don't know, stuff came up in their lives at home, so they had to leave. Couldn't stay, but Jay and Bill from out in California, Aiden from Alabama, Ethan from Dallas, Scott from Houston here, and Sean, where were you from? I forgot. Dang it. But Sean. I got your name anyway, Sean. So don't hold it against me. But great group of folks out there. That was fun. We did a lot of stuff indoors. Spent a day at Cedar Ridge Preserve, or half a day, 3 hours. Vaulting, walking, running, jumping, carrying each other, dragging each other, climbing stuff. And of course, me being me, I was taking a lot of nature photos. I was like the little kid being left behind. Mom, Dad, wait up, wait up. Don't leave me. But because I'd be there taking pictures of flowers and butterflies and all this other stuff. But so it was a good time. To get certified in level 2, we have to do groundwork, breathing, posture, crawling, balancing, walking, running, vaulting, climbing, throwing, catching, carrying, a whole wide range of stuff. So, you got to do a balanced hand-foot crawl, what some people call a bear crawl, on your 2x4, stuff like that, and be able to jump up and grab a bar, and then from a dead hang, pop up on top of it. You're not standing on it yet. That's level 3, but you got to have your waist against it and have your hands down, and so your upper body's against it and you're straightened out. Do clean and jerk, things like that. So very, very broad range of skills. But it was cool. Everyone's good at everything, but some people are always a little better at some things than some others, strengths and weaknesses and all that, preferences, what you train. So I'd be better at one thing than some others. They'd be better at me at these other things. But nice stuff. I am now a certified official level 2 MovNat fitness instructor. So that's nice. It's a big achievement.
Congratulations.
Cool. Thank you, sir. But of course, been recovering from that and tutoring and trying to catch up on sleep and all this other stuff. So you're all good, Scott? You've caught up from end of the school year and grading and everything?
Yes, I'm ready to roll. My final exams, I do Socratic seminars. So it's refreshing for them that it's not something they have to try and cram for, but it's also a much more useful skill in life than is taking a multiple choice exam.
Cool.
So it's not as stressful, I think, for them as their other classes.
Is that in all your classes or just some of them or what?
No, I do all. For macroeconomics, we do a seminar on materialism and luxury and talk about how much money does it take to be happy. And there's actually research on this. So I have the kids guess, and we get some interesting, you only need $30,000 a year. Or some kids are like, you need at least $300,000 a year. And the answer, according to psychologists, is $75,000. That past that, people don't self-report being any happier. You just have nicer stuff, essentially. And so then for psychology, we do one called Moral Skills and Motives. And we talk about should moral situations be rewarded, or does that diminish them? And how is the best way to encourage and grow morality in people? And we start with the example of a kid drowning. You jump in and save them, and the parents offer a reward. Now, this was unsolicited. Is it okay to take it? And right there, we burn 10, 15 minutes. Some kids saying yes, some saying no. Some point out that in some cultures, if I save your life, right, you're obligated then to serve me until either you've saved mine or kind of a requisite amount. And you're kind of relieving some of the guilt of the parents by accepting the gift. And so we go through questions like that. And then philosophy, we do one on how much equality do we want. There's a great film out there called 2081, and it's a film adaptation of Kurt Vonnegut's short story, Harrison Bergeron. And it's a society in which the strong have to wear weights, the beautiful have to wear masks, ballerinas have to wear sandbags because it's not fair that they jump higher than the other ballerinas. And so it's a nice dystopian 20-minute film, and we watch that, and then the next day we have the seminar.
Yeah, unlike some of the other things like that, that's a really, really, the one you're talking about is a really, really, really short read. How many pages is it? 5 or something? 10?
Yeah, it's maybe three or four tops, so it's a short read.
Yeah, but pretty good. Yeah, I've seen that little movie you're talking about. Pretty good. But cool. And then how do you grade them if you're doing Socratic things like that?
So I was trained to do Socratic seminars by Michael Strong. I've had some other training as well, but he has a great book called The Habit of Thought. And he lays out how to do Socratic seminars. So I took from his book kind of the key skills you're trying to train and assess and made a rubric from that. And I have them self-evaluate. And people initially think, they'll just all give themselves hundreds. Yeah. Quite the opposite. I find them to be very, almost perfectly accurate. I do obviously review and adjust their scores if necessary. And I keep notes as we're doing this about who's doing what.
Yeah, cool. Good. But yeah, speaking of that, of like when I was going up to Dallas, I was listening to one of the books you recommended, How to Read a Book by Adler.
Yes.
Got that on Audible and started reading that. It's good.
Nice.
Yeah, I recommend it.
And for those who don't want to read the full book or listen to the full book, he does have about a 6-page condensation of it called How to Mark a Book. And that's a free PDF you can find online.
Yeah, I found that too. Just haven't had time to look at that yet, but yeah. But yeah, it's nice learning new things from what he says and patting myself on the back when I've thought of something that he says, or, I've learned it from someone else. Because like marking up a book, you need to have some instruction on it. It helps, but it's out there in society. It's not like a super genius idea that only a few people are going to come up with. A lot of people know about marking books. There's, underlining, double underlining, lines on the side, squigglies, circling, starring, all over the place. So some of that I didn't think of on my own, but I've assimilated it through the years from learning from other people.
Well, one of the best things I think his article or book does is gives you permission to write in books, because so many of us were taught that books are sacred and you don't damage them. But if you really want to use them properly, especially obviously if they're your own books, it's so much more helpful when you look back 6 months, 6 years later, and you can pick up that whole book basically by reviewing your markings.
Yeah, and I know in some books I've read before, if I look back like 20 or 30 years, I wouldn't want to read that copy because I'd look back and I'd be embarrassed at how stupid I was from some of the stuff I did. I thought that was smart. Oh my gosh, that is so stupid.
Well, and I found my marking system after I read Adler and I first started marking in books. I look back now and realize I didn't mark enough, that I was still kind of gingerly marking here and there. Then I maybe went a little bit in the other direction where I was marking a whole lot, and I've kind of found that happy balance now to what's really central, the message of the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good stuff. But yeah, and so that's a book I think we'd both recommend for a lot of people to read, and ironically enough, it's how to read a book, and I'm listening to it on Audible. But it works. Can't read while I'm driving to Dallas. Not a good idea. So we'd recommend it. That'll help, because there's a lot of stuff we have to write about, which is our topic for today, writing. And as we talked about last time with Scott, a lot we can write about just on our own, and we'll get into some of that. But one thing we can write about is a book, and that's so we wanted to have writing part 2 to dig into this a little bit, because I think it's pretty clear for some people, because of their schooling, how to write in some areas. Like, everyone knows you write stuff in English. Like, you read a book and you write about it. Now, unfortunately, that might have made some people hate some books, like maybe overanalyzing some Shakespeare or some literature. Adler addresses that point too, how that's wrong. You got to read through it for the pleasure of it. That's the most important thing, and what you get out of it. Then he'll say, when you're reading, read through it first time as quick as you can. Then you once you have the whole, what the big picture is, then you can start analyzing it. He does not like analyzing it before you've gone through it, which is, analyzing it too much is what people do when they're going through it nowadays. And then, some teachers could do a balance, like some books you just read. Then you got to do Scott's idea of write a summary on a 3x5 or 4x6 note card, or have a short little outline. Then they don't got to do much. It takes a lot of the stress out of it. Just read it. Then there can be other books where you delve into it more. Or just as I have Melanie's kids write essays over numerous times, we have many drafts before I let them go on to a new one. That's the only way to really learn to write. Same thing, I think, with reading. If you're going to learn to read really well, you got to go through a book numerous times. Like, you'll notice is years go by and you get a little more knowledge, a little more wisdom about the world. You see more in a book than you did before. Or you realize you missed something when you were reading. So,
and as we've mentioned before, reading good writers is a great way to improve your writing. Yeah. When you see people who really have a command of the craft, you really just pick up lots of tips and stylistic things as you read.
Yeah, agreed. I know from my own experience, I sure did. then you learn to appreciate why it's important to do that. You see what someone can say and the power of their thought through writing. Whereas if someone doesn't ever read good writing, then they're not really seeing as well how important it is or the kind of impact they can make. They just have a bad idea that all writing is lame and boring.
And that's one problem with modern textbooks. They may be more efficient at conveying information, but they're certainly not eloquent in any way. They've really been I'm not saying they're dumbed down, because they're not, but they've been watered down a bit as far as what the reading level, the Lexile percentage, the grade level is often kind of drawn toward the lowest common denominator. And in an attempt to do that and convey information as easily as possible, they've kind of sucked all of the nice writing and, something that can make you feel moved. And I'm thinking of history books in particular here.
Yeah.
And then kids complain that it's just sterile dates and facts.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one thing, like I say. Some people think, well, like, math is useless, or they hate math, or history or science or whatever. This is boring and useless. But they're making a mistake because they don't know any better. They don't have the perspective to see it. What they really don't like is how it's taught. They don't know whether they hate math or hate science or if it's useless or not, because it's all confused together for them. It's all this one thing, and they can't differentiate the aspects that are good and bad. And it's some bad tools that the teacher has and is forced to use, or things they don't know. I mean, I sure the heck didn't know better before I learned some stuff about really how to teach subjects better and what really mattered, because of the culture we're brought up in and how things are done. But you get the philosophy right, and then it's a lot more interesting, and you can teach it a lot better. So the how is a big driving important factor in this whole thing, not just the subject itself, how it's done.
A good example of that would be a gentleman named Hans Rosling, and he just died a few years ago. But he takes statistics on life expectancy, infant mortality, GDP per capita, per country, stuff that's really boring. And he plugs it into some great visuals. And you can go to the website gapminder.org, and there's a lot of stuff to play around with there. But he makes the data so fascinating with how it's presented, and you can see different countries growing over time and so on. But he's also so excited about his own subject. And he's got a great, I think it's a Swedish accent. He's just fascinating to listen to. And here he's explaining income quintiles within two different countries in Africa. And you're like, yes, Hans, tell me more. It's so fascinating.
Yeah. What's his last name?
Rosling, Rosling.
Cool. Yeah, there's someone else who's really good with statistics and data analysis. Don't recall his name right now. Oh, Edward Tufte.
Mm-hmm.
Edward Tufte, Tufte.
Yes.
He's got some beautiful stuff up on his website. But that's all another subject we could discuss in the future.
Well, it's actually, so I have a colleague who I showed my colleague Tufte's work and the website. He teaches world history, and he bought the famous map or drawing that Tufte made about Napoleon's troops marching to Russia and then back. Or was it Hitler's troops? I guess it was Napoleon's. And so there's a tremendous amount of information conveyed in one small chart. Basically, it's the thickness of the line as it goes toward Moscow and coming back. It conveys how many troops died along the way. And it's considered one of the single best presentations of complex information in a simple way. And that's precisely what we want to do with writing, is take complex information, funnel it, synthesize it, and make it conveyable.
Mm-hmm. again, we'll have to discuss all that more in the future. That's like interesting stuff. Beautiful work. But, as we say, reading, very important to writing. There's a lot of things you can get there. As we were saying, a lot of people know everyday life. You write a lot in English about literature and stuff like that. But, and we write in history to some extent too. That's where, if there's going to be any writing, mostly it's there. And so we'll talk about more of that. One thing I wanted to do today too was give people some ideas about how writing could be utilized in other areas like the sciences. Because people do too many word problems and don't think and reason and be logical fully enough in those. So a lot of people would think physics, just math problems. Chemistry, just a bunch of math problems. Math, just a bunch of math problems. But there's a lot of writing we can actually do, especially in might be easier in some biology. Might be a good place to start. Astronomy. As I think we've discussed sometime or other, but one thing specifically is to have students or children, so this is relevant for whether, if you're a teacher, if you're a parent, if you're a homeschool parent, if you're a business professional wanting to make their own writing better and more, this applies to everybody. And I'll put some stuff up, you look on the internet, search it up yourself, folks. A lot of people out there in companies constantly talk about how business writing is poor, how the employees at companies cannot write well, and a lot of them have to train their own employees. I don't care if they've been through college, they've been through high school, they've been through college, does not matter. They cannot write well. And you've seen some of that too, Scott, like in Forbes and stuff, right?
Yes. Well, I've mentioned this before, but I will never stop mentioning it. The writers of directions. It is amazing to me that people think they're clearly conveying information. And end of school procedures. All right, there's a lot of memos coming out right now on what we need to do for the end of the year. And boy, some of the information is just not being conveyed clearly. And that's a thought process. It happens through writing, I guess, but they don't seem to have thought these things through. And part of it, again, is that curse of knowledge that they know how it's supposed to go together, but you have to explain it to someone who doesn't know. Mm-hmm. And we see this with teachers all the time. Because they know, they think it's easier to understand than it really is.
Yeah, true. I like your idea that you said in one of the prior podcasts about when your students write something and then you say, okay, now tell me as if I'm a fourth grader.
Yeah. And they can do it. Yeah. And they're like, well, that's how you need to write to someone, because this comes up in their academic essays as well, is since they know we know history or whatever, they make certain presumptions. Well, you can't presume that the reader knows those things. You have to make the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Learn to have a good, concise argument. And that's where, this is a good place to bring in some philosophy. When you have a good epistemology, you know that all knowledge is integrated. It's connected, in other words, into one whole. That's what we mean by integration here. You have all these individual pieces of knowledge, but to be rational and to have proper knowledge and understanding and a mind that functions, all of our knowledge, as much as we have the time for and everything, must be connected to everything else. So the point here is that geometry comes into play to help people learn a concise, efficient thought process. I hear it time and again, that's where a lot of people first see it. They've never seen reasoning or had experience with it until geometry. And so when people learn geometry properly and we think in principle and teachers apply it to all other areas instead of just like teaching it platonically like it has no relation to anything else and to reality, and all the subjects are different and unrelated, if we draw lessons from it, then students will be better writers, because it's exactly what you said. They've got to have a concise argument laid out. What information do we need? Where do we start? It's like the given of a proof. What steps do we go through? What knowledge do we have to bring into play? And what's our conclusion? And Abraham Lincoln knew that, and that's why he studied geometry. And he said that explicitly in some of his speeches.
And in what order should that information be conveyed?
Yeah.
Because often people front load a lot of stuff that should come later, and vice versa.
Yeah. So, and we'll put some links in the show notes, show how, a lot of people out there, not just me, I learned from them, a lot of people talking about how a lot of business professionals cannot write very well. So it's an important topic. And if you want some help, come to Scott, come to me, get in contact, and, we can help you write better and work on thinking and logic skills fundamental to it. But so we can do, a lot of writing in English and history, as we say, write about characters. I think we talked about some of that in the past, like to learn some fiction writing, start with a story that's already told, like The Little Red Hen or something, and kind of tell it yourself, or say what would happen before that or after that, or use the characters in a different way, and then have the children start making up their own. Similar thing with nonfiction. That's some of the stuff that Ben Franklin did on purpose to deliberately to make himself a better writer. Read some nonfiction, pick out some keywords, and then write it on your own with those keywords. And then we could do different things like what Scott says, get a book in biology or history, and have the kids, or a business professional or an adult getting ready to teach their kids, write on a 3x5 or 4x6 card a summary of the book, or just on a piece of paper a one sentence summary, or on a piece of paper make a short outline of the book. Those are some simple options, because if we're going to write well, we got to know the main idea. And that's a great thing. Adler brings that up in his How to Read a Book. So he says, you got to have 4 questions when you're reading. What's the main idea? Number 1. Number 2, what are the details? Number 3, do you remember the others? You probably don't. It's been a while. Number 3, what was number 3? 3 and 4, I forgot. Oh my gosh. Oh yeah, number 3, is it true? And number 4, how does it relate to other things and why is it important? So what is the big picture? What is the topic of the book? What are the details? Is it true, in whole or in part? And why does it matter? So 4 questions for reading all books. But number 1, as he says, what's the big picture? So that's important to have a focused piece of writing. Being able to pick out a big picture in something else, and then being able to write something that stays on topic and doesn't ramble all around.
I think I mentioned this article in a previous podcast, but it's worth a quick revisit. One of the articles I have them look at in economics is titled Fighting Forest Fires and Macroeconomic Stability. And it makes a comparison between forest fires being largely a product of human management, that we've mismanaged forests to the point that we have so much undergrowth that when lightning hits, the whole forest goes. Mm-hmm. And when you look at a properly managed or a natural forest where mankind is not intervening as much, the trees are much further apart, there's less undergrowth, etc. And it's more like a quilt in which you have dense forest over here, there's a meadow from where lightning hit 5 years ago, and so on. And then they make the comparison to how the Federal Reserve manages the economy and so on, and that by stamping out all minor regional recessions, we build these systems that become too big to fail.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so pretty complex, two sets of topics that have a relation. It's about a 4-page article. I have them read that, and then they write a summary of it on the 3x5 card. But even there, I want them to go smaller. I said, your goal is to convey what's in that article in as few as lines as possible. And I look through them all and pull out the best 2 or 3. And these kids in 2 to 4 lines have really synthesized what's going on there and the principle behind both the economy and the forest in 3 or 4 lines. That's not bad for a 17-year-old.
Yeah. Cool. And another thing that's interesting in that regard, in trying to stamp out all fires, then a bunch of tinder builds up, and then you have one big huge fire which kills most all the trees. Whereas if it burned more naturally, and if they took care of it, if they managed nature in a natural way instead of an ignorant, uninformed way, there'd be more fires, but they'd burn through more quickly.
Yes, and I have pictures of forests from the 1900s, and again, managed versus not. I actually had an argument with a guy who used to work for the forest department online, and using the knowledge from this article and just, common sense, he finally conceded that we've quote protected them too much, and you really do have to remove some of that underbrush.
And then if you dig into the biology, there's some trees like pines must have fire in order to reproduce.
Yes.
It's required for the seeds to get certain signals and to germinate, and if the fire's too hot, it'll kill them. But if it's the temperature they've evolved for, then they'll reproduce and go on. Whereas with no fire, they don't have those signals, they're not going to reproduce. We're killing the forest then.
And many types of bark are thick enough to protect from fire, and that's what burns off that underbrush. But humans come in and stop that from happening. And then you get all the underbrush, which then becomes hot enough to burn through that bark. And that's when you lose 10,000 acres.
Yeah, totally. Right. But, and so there, right there, people say, look, science is boring. However, we're going to write about science. It's a bunch of math equations. No, that situation right there, people could write a paragraph, a short 1 page, a whole volume of stuff about that situation and what's going on.
Well, I read an interesting article today about why allergies have increased in urban areas. And there's apparently statistical data for this, but he went back and found that in 1949, the guidelines from the government for urban planning said to plant only male trees.
Yeah, I saw your article that, yeah.
Yeah, and now I first learned that there was a difference between male and female trees in some species, species not. But that the male trees produce the pollen, the female, the one that drops the fruit. It would take workers to pick up any pods or fruit, and therefore plant only male trees. Multiply that by a couple of decades, and we have a lot more pollen than we used to.
Yeah, there's another thing. Depending on the age of the kids, they could have some research question where they got to look it up and see why something's the case and where it came from. With the internet, things like you mentioned are not out of the scope of something like that. Even with libraries, they could have done it, but you got almost every library at your fingertips nowadays by comparison to what we had.
And there's an interesting way to engage kids in trees and pollen and all of that biology stuff that might not be particularly interesting. But in that article, they went to the local nursery school, and it was surrounded by trees that were really high pollen. Mm-hmm. And there's an interesting, arguably health problem, but a way to get high school kids interested in a real way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if the culture were better, they'd be interested more in biology in the first place. But they're all sheltered and in a little bubble away from the sun and reality and biology, unfortunately. Not their fault. Poor kids. But we got to get them out and get them. We're part of nature. We got to be true to our nature by being in nature. But so they could read, like I have Melanie's kids do. We read a book about biology and then write an essay about it. So we could do the 3x5 note card thing with the other ideas I mentioned, or they could write an essay depending on the age of the kids. Just write a summary of the book, and there you're writing in science. And then depending on their age, maybe it's just a paragraph summary, maybe it's a page, maybe it's 2 pages. You got to look and develop things logically for each individual according to their age and cognitive abilities. But you could write a summary and then start having them do things with books like, why is it important? You can start having them put quotes from the book in the essay. So first they just write stuff down. Then they make it a little longer. Then, okay, you got to have some quotes from the book to back up what you're saying. You've got to go beyond just what's there and say why this is important. Say what you learned from it in a last paragraph maybe. And then when they get better at that, bring in the requirement that they have 1 or 2 outside sources that they bring in other than the book. And then they do that for a while, and then, okay, now it's 3 or 4. So when they're in 7th grade, maybe 1 or 2 outside sources. 8th grade, 3 or 4 outside sources. And then when they're in high school, they can start to bring in more, or read 2 or 3 books and write 1 essay, comparing and contrasting all those 3 books.
That's a great point you mentioned about bringing in outside sources. One thing I tell them, as a young person, people are going to take you seriously. And when you have outside sources or you're quoting an authority in the field, it gives credence to the argument that you're making. Mm-hmm. And it seems like an easy skill, but in the one-pagers we do with the Syntopicons, they have to have 1 to 2 quotes supporting their viewpoint. It's amazing how many kids just take the quote and just paste it in there. Yeah. It has to do work. It has to support, or it has to show a transition in your theme. And mm-hmm. I think we kind of take that skill for granted that they know how to do that.
Yeah, no, right. But yeah, for them, I know what you mean. It's like, okay, here's an elephant's trunk, and here's a seal's, the tusk of a seal, and here's a beak of a bird, and look, isn't this beautiful? No, it's monstrous. No. Yeah, they got to learn how to put it together logically and how to make it flow in the essay. I know what you mean. Agreed. And then know what part of it to have and what part of the quote not to have. What's relevant to what you're saying. So, and then they could, so there's a lot in biology they could do like that with books. And then, when you really develop those ideas, there's a great deal because you write about a book and then, okay, what'd you learn from it? That could be a lot. Or bring in outside sources. Then you can start having these huge essays or have one pager that's really concise and beautiful, if they really learn to write well. And you really do this because as we've talked about, writing is really important for our lives and living successful and being happy. And how do you pronounce it, Scott? What do the Greeks call it? Eudaimonia?
Yes, eudaimonia.
Happiness. That's, what does it mean in Greek?
It flourishing.
Cool.
And another term, consilience, is a Greek term meaning a jumping together of knowledge. And that you mentioned earlier in this podcast about interdisciplinary, studying different fields. There's different types of writing for different fields. I listened to a podcast this week. I think the book is called Range. And he was...
I saw that.
Yeah, similar circles. But he talks about how he read through the Nobel Prize winning speeches of these scientists and how they all, first of all, had hobbies that were in some aesthetic field, like glass blowing or painting, something non-scientific. That they also were kind of broad-based, and now things are becoming so specialized And this has been argued since C.P. Snow wrote that article, A Tale of Two Cultures, back in the 1950s. And things are very specialized now compared to then. And that does give us some gains, but it also starts to block, and he argues in that podcast that we're blocking some new production things because we can't think in a wide-ranging way.
Yeah, I agree. And wisdom is not detailed and focused. Wisdom is big picture. You can't be super specialized in everything and be wise. It's a contradiction. But I got that book, Range. What's the subtitle? Like, why it's more important to be a generalist in a specialized world, or something like that?
That probably.
Why a generalist can succeed in a specialized world or something. But yeah, seems like it'd be good. Who's the author? Do you remember?
I don't. I think I was on my bike ride. Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, and then Baron Heinrich, who we've had on, he, world-class biologist, great thinker, independent. He does a lot of things all in biology too, like he's doesn't just focus on one little thing. Like some people get all hyper-focused on some little chemical and one aspect of biology, but he's a naturalist and loves all of it, and he's done cutting edge, fundamental, revolutionary work in how moths cool themselves down, how wasps warm themselves up to fly, raven intelligence, bee society. He's a world-class ultra marathoner. He's still, you can look up Baron Heinrich on the internet. He's still in the top 10 in America for the 50-mile, 100-mile, and 24-hour run.
Yeah,
all kinds of stuff. And then people know about Richard Feynman, the physicist. However, if you dig into his life, he was investigating and kind of applying science towards people and investigating ants, and he played the bongo drums and learned all this different stuff. He just didn't. Oh, hi, I'm Richard, the physics teacher.
Yeah.
I don't know what the weather's like. I can't talk about sports or anything. It's so much of a misconception. But yeah,
and those technical skills, or the people doing coding, or the chemist who's looking at a particular problem, they're certainly necessary in the world and give us breakthroughs. But they solve particular problems. Like you said, the big picture thinkers are the ones who are going to be in higher demand, especially in an increasingly complex and changing world. You need different types of thought and having your brain stretched in different ways instead of just science or just psychology.
Yeah. And I don't know where it comes from. That'd be interesting to dig back culturally and philosophically, but the idea that we should specialize is anti-human, I think. We should specialize, but we are specialized generalists as human beings. We're not like ants that have a specific task or something. As humans, you want to learn a lot about coding, but I don't care. You still got to have friends. You still have family. You still have other interests. You still got to get food and all this stuff. You have to be a generalist by your nature. And then if someone's in coding and they start to learn about all these other areas, I think they would be better at their job, they'd be happier, and they'd be wiser.
Well, someone who's a coder, studying biology and studying spontaneous order, right? True. There's a lot of parallels in nature with algorithms.
True.
I'm told, since I'm not a coder.
Information theory, right?
Right.
Math, all this, yeah. But, and then I think there's a book by E.O. Wilson called Consilience.
Yes.
I'd like to get that and listen to that. E.O. Wilson is a great biologist. I've read a little bit of his works, but not enough.
I have his first book is called On Human Nature, and that was
I was wondering if you were going to say that. I'm listening to that now.
yeah, 1974,
Yeah.
and that launched the field of sociobiology, which we now call evolutionary biology. And he was an ant expert in
Yeah.
the beginning. But that book was very controversial when it first came out because it implied that genetics influences behavior, which it does. Genetics influences a lot of things.
Mhm.
But I have read his book, Consilience, as well. It's very good.
Cool. Good. Thanks. Good to know.
Yeah, he's got in that book 4 Principles of Science. And that's kind of a nice shorthand of scientific thinking. And we go over that in my psychology class to start the year.
And those books, I would not recommend that someone have a younger student read and summarize. That's for like high school, late high school, or college, depending on the kid.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not appropriate for younger. For younger kids, they need to read age-appropriate books in biology and all that. But, you can contact Scott or I, and we can make some recommendations. I've got, as I say, I've had Melanie's kids read a number of books so far for biology. And then, besides reading books and summarizing them, segueing off from them, some writing that could be done in the same way, we got to start logically and smart and have elementary school students do something and then develop it more when you get older. So they could go to a nature area, or if they can't do that, look something up on the internet, go to a nature area, describe what you see. So to make students learn how to observe firsthand, because it can be done in biology with more appreciation than in physics or chemistry. Some boys are, in general, some girls too, but mostly boys are going to like machines and get a kick out of them and maybe want to write about those. But girls are not going to want that as much. But I think both like biology, because I think it's in our nature. That's something that E.O. Wilson talks about, biophilia.
Well, and an anatomy class, learning how our own body works, because nobody really tells us. Same thing with taking psychology. It's kind of the owner's manual for the human experience, and nobody really tells us these things, and we kind of figure them out as we go. But what great information to have, how your body works, how your mind works, to the extent that we know.
Yeah. And so they can go out to a park or whatever, describe color, texture, relationships, how they feel. There's all kinds of things with the colors, the shapes, the textures, and they're learning to observe. That's something that Dr. Maria Montessori brought up and had explicitly designed in her curriculum and pedagogy, teaching kids how to use their senses, because it's not a given. They got to learn how to really differentiate haptically, by touch, things they see, and then how to put it into words and describe it conceptually. And so they could do something where they're just talking about it and telling you, or recording it. Maybe have them make a video and put it online or something, and then get into writing. Do a lot of descriptions. Because there's even it's important, because I know I've heard, I don't remember who it was, some biologist, when he'd train graduate students, he'd give them something to look at, and he'd say, okay, I want you to write down 100 things about this. And of course, most of them, not having learned how to be observant, like Sherlock Holmes, Sherlock Holmes was observant. I'm not saying he wasn't observant. They haven't learned to be observant as Sherlock Holmes was observant, but they'd write maybe 3 or 5 things or 10 things and turn it in, and that's all I can think of. He'd say, no, go back and write 100 things. And eventually, they would learn to be very observant about some biological thing, a leaf, a bacteria, or whatever. But it's not going to happen without practice. And then that makes your writing better. That'd make fiction better. If people could be more descriptive about people and hair color and where the hair was and how someone moved and textures and light indoors and light outdoors, the writing would be so much better.
Well, and that's, a fun game to play with kids, training that, say, spies or FBI, Secret Service, Special Forces, to walk through a room and how many things did you observe?
Yeah,
how many chairs were in the room? You opened the refrigerator, what was in it? Right, so you can play these little games of who saw what.
Good point, yeah. Or restaurants, cars. How many white cars did we go by on the way here? How many
and teaching situational awareness. How many people were in that last aisle on the grocery store that we went down? Just paying attention.
Yeah, I was thinking of being very observant has all kinds of benefits, because then you're paying attention to what's around you, and that helps you avoid trouble. Then you can see, if you're used to knowing how many white cars you saw on the way going somewhere, then you're more likely to observe someone following you in their car, or someone following you in a store, or someone staring at you in an unusual way. You'll know what's normal and go, this girl or guy is staring at me weird. I better seek safety.
Yes.
But so very important. So there's a lot of ideas in biology there. And then in physics and chemistry, if people look at the history of physics, then they'll see more how you can do a lot of writing in physics and chemistry. Be surprising. Look at some biographies of great chemists or great physicists, great mathematicians, and see why they solved their problems, or find some books that describe some complex math in simple ways. I've got some books on the history of physics that are good. So people could get some ideas by Physics for the Inquiring Mind by Dr. Eric Rogers, or Introductory Physics by Herbert Priestley. These are superior books than most books on physics, because they go through things historically, and then they show how people developed ideas and propositions in science and why they're true. Because most of the time, children are not learning science; they're learning what someone else knows about science. They're learning someone else's ideas. They're not learning how, because to really do science and to know it, it's an independent thing on your own. If they're learning science, then they'd be learning the content and the methods, because science is about that. It's essentially one way to look at it is the content, but another way to look at science, the concept, is how it's a certain way of doing things. It's a way of thinking, identifying things, looking for cause-effect relationships, building up the big picture. And so with these books, they show how physics developed through history as a story, how one thing led to another. People are doing research in electricity, and they're studying, because they're scientists, okay, how does electricity go through water? How does it go through fluids? How does it go through solids? Oh, it goes through metal better than some other things. Does it go through earth? What about trees and bark and grass? And how does it go through gases? And then when they're doing that, they start finding out about these other particles and gamma rays and X-rays and stuff like that. So then it is understandable what's going on, and as opposed to all this stuff coming up out of nowhere and just following authority. But putting it in a context that makes it engaging, and that's just like what we talked about with the history, that if it's just bold print terms, they look them up, they write them down. It's not set in the context of the centralization of power or power corrupting or some broader topic that engages them. Yeah. Why is it important to human life? Why should I care? I mean, that's why we have knowledge, to survive and thrive. And it's because we care about something. So bring in the caring. This mind-body, and one reason we don't have some of that is because of bad philosophy, this mind-body dichotomy thing. Like, oh, you got to have a dispassionate, like, search for the truth. Nonsense. I have a passionate search for the truth. I want to know what the truth is, metaphorically speaking, the rest be damned. Like, I don't care about some of my emotion. It's got to go. If this is what's true and I want to survive, then to hell with these bad ideas. Some things I thought before, may they be damned. I want to stick to the truth.
We should do an episode on the scientific method and scientific reasoning. Because that's what I start my psychology class with, is scientific thinking, Occam's razor. Cool. How do you know something is true? The core question in epistemology.
Yeah, and in a lot of stuff. And here's something I'll read. This is from Introductory Physics by Herbert Priestley. There's some part in here I just love the writing because of the complex sentences, and so I'll use this teaching grammar sometimes to show how people can use grammatical constructions to make a really good sentence. But this is in a physics book. People are going to think physics book's boring. Why should I read this? But in this, it'd be better to see and read it yourself because it's kind of complex. But so you get the idea. He's talking about the chapter 6, the solar system and universal gravitation, introduction, 6.1, and then section 6.2, the sky. I'll just read a little bit. But he says, early man was tremendously impressed with what he saw in the sky. Feeling that his welfare depended upon retaining their goodwill, he deified the sun and moon. By magic rites, he sought their blessing on him, his family, and his crops. He noted the regular rising, setting, and motion of the sun and moon, and the orderly procession of the stars. This orderliness he first ascribed to the will of the gods, but his questioning mind gradually replaced myth and superstition with a more rational interpretation of celestial events and their causes, culminating in the Newtonian synthesis. This final overthrow of Aristotelian logic by experimental science came only after a conflict between science and the church. The heavens appear today just as they did centuries ago. The sun, seemingly the largest body in the sky, daily rises in the east, climbs across the sky, and sets in the west. Its daily motion undergoes a series of regular changes in points of time between rising and setting, and in noonday height in the sky, accompanied by regular changes in weather, vegetation, etc., which we call the seasons. Then he goes on to say more, but the parallelism in there, and the writing of a physics professor, this is great. That's just beautiful.
And as you were reading that passage, I was thinking that, a good English teacher in teaching how to write is using examples from poems or from English authors. There's nothing wrong with that. A great English teacher would include a paragraph like that from physics. And here's a piece from history.
True.
And these different fields, and you're getting different approaches of the human mind to language and thought.
Yeah, agreed. And one thing I'd say here is, he says the final overthrow of Aristotelian logic by experimental science. That we'll talk about that in the future, but that's not
right. I'm just that caught my ear.
Please remember, Priestley. He's got a great book, but he doesn't know everything. He studied physics, not philosophy or the history of philosophy or history of science so much. So I make mistakes too. So what? But he's wrong.
Aristotle's not so easy to overthrow.
Yes. But and so like there's a piece of writing. It's just like 3 paragraphs out of the whole big long book that shows how people can write about physics and chemistry in essays. It's not just a bunch of stuff. Write about, and in the book it's great, unlike a lot of modern books, he actually quotes scientists from what, when they're talking about their experiments, and he goes through the thinking people were doing about heat, electricity, the solar system, and there's plenty of topics students could write about, like in high school. Why did people believe that the moon, things on Earth and things in the heavens follow different laws, and why did they see that that was wrong? No math in there whatsoever. Zero. Total, like, physics and astronomy. Or what did Benjamin Franklin do to figure out and prove that lightning is electricity? Go through his thought process. Or how did people figure out that heat is a form of motion and not some, what did they call it? They thought that heat was like a imponderable particle. In other words, it didn't have weight. I forgot the name right now. It's not coming to me, but they thought it was actually like a particle, like particles of other things, and that was mistaken. And what are the experiments? What do they do? How did they prove it? Sound, musical instruments, some modern physics. Talk about cause and effect and evidence and experiments, and it's writing. And then if people look up things about, what's his name? Robert Payne, maybe. I think it was him. He discovered or formulated the concept of keystone species. There's a great deal they could write about that. The importance, like, how did the wolves of Yellowstone Valley change the valley and change the river? And that could be one topic you could write about through your whole life. Like a little kid writes a paragraph about it, and then in junior high school they write a page. Then in high school they write like a 5-page paper or a research paper about it. So so there's some like hopefully that helps. Like there's some like really good ideas about how we can, it's pretty clear. A lot of people write in history and literature, but we can also write a lot in like things about math and physics and chemistry, and write about biographies of them. Great deal we can do. And then in English and, in history, people could write more instead of just dates, but talk about causes and why something happened, and look at it as a scientific experiment, like how they proved that we need individual rights or something like that, or how they learned how a society should function.
Well, and when you look at political systems, having an understanding of human nature, if you look at communism, Nazism, etc., had a deeply flawed view of human nature. And now we're back to Adam Smith. How do we harness self-interest in order to serve other people? Right? You can do it with blind coercion like the Soviets did, or a system in which their incentives lead them to serving other people. Mm-hmm. And you're going to get radically different outcomes.
Yeah.
And so, again, that conversation has no names and dates per se.
Yeah. No wars, no kings. Right. It's not like 50 dates and years on a sheet of paper with a bunch of wars next to them.
Doesn't have to be boring.
Yeah. So how are things looking for you with time, Scott? You need to go soon, or we got a little more time, or what?
Yeah, I'm getting short on time.
Cool. All right, so I'll wrap it up really quickly then. One thing we can discuss, I'd like to discuss more in the future. I wish I had this on video. Years ago, I tutored a student, and we were writing an essay on the poem "The Tiger" by Blake.
Mm-hmm.
And man, and that's something I'd like to discuss someday. Like, take more time to fully develop it, because we worked for maybe an hour and a half or 2 hours on that. But oh, geez, like there was so much you can talk about in that regard, about definition, focus, big picture, thinking for yourself. That's why I wish I had that thing on video, because that was like such a great tutoring session. In fact, it was so great, and he was maybe 10th grade. I don't think he even got everything we were doing. It was great for him to experience it, but he'd have to experience it more again and again, and have that trained in him, for him to really understand and get it and make it a habit. You know, sometimes no matter how great it is, if it's just one thing you see and then never see again, like you don't know what to make of it and forget it. But
right.
We were just doing some really, really good work. Just love that teetering session. Wish I had it on video. But yeah, we can talk about that more in the future since you got to go. But cool. Any last words, Scott?
No, I think scientific method is coming soon because we've hinted at it a couple of times, and I think we could dive down and talk about and explain scientific reasoning.
Awesome, sounds good. So yeah, we could talk about more writing in the future, but I think we got a heck of a lot nailed down and developed between the last podcast and this one. You know, one thing I wanted to do was talk about how you can write in science, because I think, you know, that was probably would have been a big mystery to a lot of people because of the way science is thought of and taught in the culture. Oh yeah, and then I forgot to mention, like, Dr. Michael Fowler. He's got some good work on the internet about the history of physics. People could read that and kind of summarize some of that stuff or segue off it also, besides the books I mentioned here. He's got stuff. And if you homeschool and your kids are older, he's got his materials available for physics for homeschooling for free. So people could look at that, download it. It'd be some really good quality material to help them really make sense of it, as we were talking about. So cool. So, yeah, that was good. Writing, it's important. Do it. Helps you think better. When you can think better, you can act better, you know, move, engage in action in the world, get your values, survive and thrive.
Sounds good.
So I guess we'll both go do a little thinking and writing and surviving and thriving ourselves. So, thank you, Scott.
All right. Enjoyed it.
Appreciate it. Okay.
Thanks.
Talk to you soon.